Well, welcome. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and thank you so much for taking time out of that day to join us. I always strive to give you lots of value, and today will be no exception. Today, we're going to be chatting with Judith Belmont about negotiating enhanced mental wellness and life skills. So, welcome, Judith. I'm really thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
and it's a really timely conversation. And for those of you who may not know her, Judith is the author of 11, count them, 11 mental health books, and they provide practical tips and tools for mental health and wellness. She's got decades of experience as a motivational speaker and a trainer. She offers presentations on a wide variety of wellness topics, from communication skills to stress management, creating positive workplaces, burnout prevention. We could all use that. She's got an MS in clinical psychology and a BS in psychology. And why don't we dive right in, Judith? You know,
Great.
I
Love
often
it.
say our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves. And obviously, that's
Absolutely.
one of the reasons I wanted you here talking about that sort of mindset negotiation. And you speak a lot about how changing our thinking can change our life. And I'd love if you could talk to us about that.
Okay. My latest book is on a book with a lot of CBT skills, cognitive behavior therapy. And that orientation is actually the most popular in the world. It's widely adopted all around the world. And the idea underneath is the quality of your thoughts determines the quality of your life.
Yeah.
If you have healthy thoughts, you're going to have a healthy life. So negotiating with yourself is the foremost, the most important thing, because if you let a lot of irrational thoughts and what's called cognitive distortions to kind of taint your mind, you're not going to feel good and you're not going to behave as well as if you had clear thinking and more healthier feelings.
Yeah. And it's funny, I think we so grossly underestimate the importance of that. I remember being stunned reading a study out of Cleveland Clinic, I think the average person has like 60,000 thoughts a day, and like 80% of those thoughts are negative and they are repeating. So
Yes.
that blows me
Exactly. So you
away.
can imagine, I have this image of food coloring in a beaker of water,
Yeah.
and one drop just discolors the whole water. You can imagine 40,000 of those.
Yeah.
And that's with the estimate that I have read, 40,000 negative thoughts a day. Just imagine how our mind turns to mud. So we
Yeah.
want to make sure we know the power of a positive thought. And
Yeah.
a positive thought can also permeate.
And can you give us some examples of that, Judith, right? When we talk about changing our thinking, because I think most people aren't intentional about showing up like this in their lives. So,
Absolutely. Because we all have what's called ants, automatic negative thoughts. They become almost like part of our DNA.
yeah.
And so we have to get rid of those ants. And
Yeah.
we need to, first thing, identify what they are. So, for instance, we often talk to ourselves a lot worse than we would talk to anybody else. Just think of how you have your self-talk. You think, oh, that was so stupid to say. I shouldn't have said that. I'm such an
Yeah.
idiot. Would you tell your best friend that? Well, the longest relationship we ever have is with ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's like the most important negotiation skill you can have is making sure that you don't talk to yourself in a way that is not helpful.
Yeah.
And so imagine an exercise would be just imagine all the negative thoughts that you might have, write them down, and then think, how about someone I really admire? What if they said those same things to me? What would I say?
Yeah.
And you would probably say, oh, no, that's not true. You're a beautiful person. You're
Yeah.
lovable. But we often don't do that to ourselves. So that's really important to keep in mind when we have negative self-talk. So an example of an ant might be labeling, oh, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Oh, what a loser. Not good enough.
Yeah.
Well, what's the problem with that? That's all or nothing thinking. It's irrational, but a lot of times people actually believe it because they say it enough to
Yeah.
themselves. And
Yeah.
maybe they've heard it from other people. So it's important to, an exercise would be write down what some of those thoughts are that are causing you feeling badly, and then think of an alternative way that's more factual.
Yeah.
So instead of I'm a loser, I've had some setbacks and I have a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
That would be an example. I shouldn't have said that. I learned from saying that moving forward what I'll avoid in the future.
Yeah.
So instead of having what's called a fixed mindset, where you're kind of fixed in the past and defining yourself, you have a growth mindset. I'm a work in progress and I'm learning along the way. And the important thing is that I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm evolving. And I take responsibility for when I do something not good to someone else, take responsibility for it, apologize, and move on.
Yeah, and it's so important because our brain goes looking to make it's almost like our thoughts become our reality because our brain looks, so if we're saying I'm stupid, our brain's going to go looking for examples of where we are, and the opposite is also true. So I often get my clients to write down the negative thoughts that permeate their, and then flip that story completely and just keep retelling that new story to yourself, that more positive story, as you say. And I wonder, Judith, because now like mental health just seems to be at an all-time low with, depression rates through the roof. And I'd love if you could share with us some tips on how we can challenge depressive thinking, if that's even the correct term.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, depressive thinking stems from having often a low self-worth and a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. So when you're depressed, you think more like a victim. Nobody likes me. That
Yeah.
kind of sort of overgeneralized. So identify the distortion. Is that true? No one likes me. Well, how about my family members? Well, how about, you probably could find one or two
Yeah.
people who like you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we have a flair for dramatics when it's about ourselves
Yeah.
and we exaggerate. So that would be one example of writing it down. I think writing down while you're trying to identify is really good. And
Yeah.
then is it fact or fiction? And then what is the type of distortion? Types of distortions are labeling, like we went over before, fortune telling. I'll never get my life together. He
Yeah.
was the only one for me. I'll never love again. I'm nothing without him. All or nothing catastrophized thinking, jumping to conclusions. Oh, he didn't call me today. He must not like me anymore.
Yeah.
We play a lot of mind tricks with ourselves, and therefore we end up having a depressive way of thinking. And laced with that is a sense of hopelessness and victimization
Yeah.
that we aren't in control of our life. Other people make us feel a certain way, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Uh, and I want to really put a pin in that for our listeners. That just totally popped for me when you said about controlling, that we're in control of our life. We grow up being taught to sort of make excuses and blame other people and talk about how their things make us do it, as opposed to saying and making a decision. I am 100% responsible for my experience of life because I may not be able to control what happens, but I can control how I choose to
Uh,
react to it.
Absolutely.
You alluded to self-esteem in there, and these all, I can see this, these are all tying together, right? What you talked about is that sort of flipping the script on that depressive thinking. What role does self-esteem play in the quality of our life, and what are some things we can do to take more control out of boosting that self-esteem?
I have an image or a visualization exercise that I think will be helpful to your listeners. Just think of a $20 bill.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter what denomination.
yeah,
And how much is it worth? $20, right? Crumble it. Maybe, like in a live presentation, I'd have people like, fold it,
yeah.
step on it, do whatever they wanted. And then it comes back and you open it up and I asked, how much is it worth? It's still worth $20. But often people don't realize they're just as worthy as the day they were born.
Mhm.
How many of us say a newborn isn't worthy because they're not as cute as the other kids in the nursery?
Yeah.
Or no, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But somehow along the way, we get bruised, we get crumbled, we get folded up. We have all sorts of things happen to us, and we forget and we don't realize we're just as worthy. I've been a therapist and now I'm a mental health coach online because I'm retired from my private practice.
Congrats.
And I have been amazed at how many people that even were wildly successful
Yeah,
and had outwardly so much, they didn't feel worthy.
yeah,
They didn't feel good about who they are. they felt somehow inferior.
Yeah.
And they did not think that they were as worthy as other people. And I, a lot of the therapy was helping them look at themselves in their lives, their
Yeah.
world, in a way that was more self-forgiving,
Yeah.
more nurturing, because sometimes there's defining moments in your life that you keep on going back to, well, that proves I'm a bad person or I shouldn't have done that. And people who are seeped with regret
Yeah.
and get anchored in the past and defined by the past, they aren't able to grow and forgive themselves. Self-compassion is probably the new self-esteem.
Yeah.
People have
Right.
self-compassion, they are generally much happier than people who are high achievers and have a lot of money and everything. And people don't realize that the importance of even teaching to our children self-compassion, self-forgiveness is so important
Uh,
because no one means to do something bad or dumb or irrational or whatever. They're just not healthy enough to act otherwise sometime.
yeah. I love that analogy that you gave about the $20 bill. That's a great visualization. And it really struck a chord with me when you talked about the babies in the nurseries. It's so true. Nobody goes around judging those babies. Everybody's just oohing and awing, and it's like a feel-good place for
Exactly.
the
They're
world to
all
go.
beautiful. And every kid in preschool that does finger painting, it's not like, well, that one's a lot better
Yeah.
than that one.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. That's
Yeah.
having a growth mindset. That's being
Yeah.
able to develop and actualize yourself, being authentic. But
Yeah.
so many times people, I'll never forget, I had this woman who told me, I've had this many failures and I can't afford one more.
Yeah.
You know what? She could only name two.
Yeah.
Those two failures in her 37 years loom larger than life.
Yeah.
And she became so perfectionistic because she didn't feel like she had any room to make another mistake. And that really is a shame.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. And it's funny, speaking of failures, a friend of mine used the term once, failabrations, and I loved it. Like learning to embrace the failures and say, well, I wish I'd done it with my kids growing up if I'd heard it back then, where you'd sit down every night and say, okay, what did you spectacularly fail at today? And what did you learn from it? Just reframing
Wow.
how we look at that. I thought it was
That
gorgeous.
is fabulous. Yes. In my book, actually, too, I have one of the tips on successful failures. I mean,
Oh,
just think of how many people who have really changed the world for the
yes.
better for us. They all have failed.
Yeah.
From Abraham Lincoln to
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg to Oprah, they've all been fired. They've all lost jobs. They've all done all these things, but they needed the failure to move on to recreate something better.
Yeah. And Edison, wasn't it 10,000 failed attempts at getting the light right? I mean, and
He
going,
said, he
yeah.
said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 ways that it didn't work.
I love that mind. So again, and for our listeners, going back to those subtle mindset shifts, how you frame what's happening in your life. And that was a beautiful example there of a reframe about our experience that's a much more positive one. And on that self-esteem, do you find, Judith, that women tend to be more effective? Like I think we're so conditioned to play small, don't brag on yourself. And I feel like that really takes a beating.
I teach people to speak with I statements, to take responsibility, I statements. But some, particularly women, feel like they're being kind of like too aggressive
Yeah.
because they want to be selfless. I'll
Yeah.
never forget, I had one client, but she represents many others that
Yeah.
said, my goal is to be like a saint, like my grandmother.
Oh,
She was so selfless.
yeah.
I said, well, how about self-care? How about, like the flight attendant says, you put your mask on yourself or someone else?
Yeah.
You need to really have good self-care skills in order to be there for other people. It's not so good to be selfless.
Yeah. Yeah. That martyrdom comes with a very high cost. It affects it. And what kind of modeling are doing? When we're selfless, we are teaching our daughters that they deserve less in life. And we're teaching our sons that they are entitled and should expect women to serve them in terms of, put be that selfless going forward. So I'm thank you for sharing that. I think it's an important
Well,
reminder to us, especially in these times, we seem to be getting some major pushback.
Absolutely. But I think the basics of human decency is using I statements, which is taking responsibility without blaming anybody else and speaking for yourself.
Yeah,
And women particularly have a hard time doing that because they're not supposed to be I.
yeah,
But you actually are being kinder to others because you're having respect for yourself, but you're also respecting other people.
yeah.
If you don't and you're like a doormat and you're not assertive, guess what? It will come out in different ways.
Yes, that
Either
is so.
explodes later or it
Yeah,
goes into depression.
yeah,
I mean, that's a very, very big area of why people get depressed
yeah,
is because they don't think that they should express themselves. I
yeah,
don't want to speak up, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to cause a scene. Well, it ends up making them disrespect themselves
yeah.
and then they get resentful.
And it induces anxiety. And actually, why don't we chat about anxiety for a minute? Because anxiety also seems to be a growing problem, especially with our youth, I find much high. And maybe they're just more vulnerable about expressing it, but it just seems to be this growing problem. Any effective coping strategies that you would suggest?
Well, I like the use of coping cards. Coping cards are cards that help ground you when you anticipate being in a situation that can be anxiety provoking. Let's say you're going to be speaking in a class or speaking in front of a group and you're afraid.
Yeah.
Have some coping cards where you have affirmations, maybe. Maybe you have a quote from either yourself or famous people, whatever, or just, when I get anxious, this is what I'm going to do. Or maybe it's a reminder that no matter what, it's not the end of the world if the presentation doesn't turn out
Yeah.
perfectly. You're just trying to be expressive and you'll learn from it and move on. Reminders, things that will help you. I think coping cards can be very good, but really the basic is what am I thinking? The only reason why you're anxious is that you're probably blowing things out of proportion. It would be terrible if I make a mistake. It would
Yeah.
be terrible if they think I'm stupid. Okay, how could you rephrase that?
Yeah.
And it would be unfortunate. It would be unfortunate if I don't come across as well as I wanted in the meeting. That doesn't cause anxiety. That's just concern and
Yeah.
makes you want to prepare. But I couldn't stand it if I,
Yeah.
flubbed it up in the meeting.
Yeah.
That's going to cause anxiety. So
Yeah.
it's really our self-talk that is going to, if it's not grounded, it's going to cause us to have a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, that's great. And you talked earlier about that catastrophizing, right? If we flip our script, flip the language that we're using for ourselves, then now I know you create therapeutic cards. So is that what they are? Like when you talk about coping cards and things like that?
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, you can make your own coping cards, but I actually have 11 books and two therapeutic card decks that are also published. Those two card decks are published by a mental health publisher called Pessy,
Yeah,
which is my main publisher.
yeah,
And it basically is different cards for anxiety and stress.
yeah,
And also for one of them is for working with groups for different exercises. So, for example, one of the cards could be what's temporary and what is permanent. And make sure you think in temporary ways instead of permanent ways. I'll never get over this. It's
yeah,
hard getting over this. Or up until now, I have had a hard time overcoming it.
yeah.
One is temporary and one is permanent. And permanent thinking causes a lot of anxiety and depression.
That's a great tip. And I love the idea of those cards as well. It's something tactile.
Yeah.
If nothing else, it serves as a reminder for us to be more intentional about our thinking and how we show up. I think that's
I
fantastic.
also like having either an anxiety kit or a stress kit or a depression prevention kit. Basically, it's a metaphorical toolkit that I have in all my books.
Yeah.
And it's always been very effective with clients that sometimes I instruct them and I give them ideas. And in workshops, I would do this all the time. Give them ideas for different metaphorical things that can remind them. A Hershey kiss might be self-love
Yeah.
and empathy towards others. Cotton ball is the importance of being soft and kind to yourself and to the importance of soothing. There's so many fun metaphorical things.
Yeah.
There's a plastic band that I use. that show you that stress can be good as long as it's managed and not
Uh,
out of control.
yeah,
So if you pull it, just imagine I have elastic band.
yeah,
If you pull it too much, it's going to crack.
yeah,
But if you don't pull it enough, it's going to be limp. So you want enough tension so the elastic band does its job. So that would be an example of how you need to manage stress and how stress can actually be positive.
yeah,
But there's so many things. You can be creative. I sometimes in workshops I would have people, I would say to people, look in your pockets or your wallets or your pocketbooks and find a metaphor for something that's important to you. People would always have such
yeah,
interest, things. So
yeah.
metaphorical toolkits are good too.
That's a great tip. I love that idea. Again, something super practical. Although for me, I couldn't use Hershey Kisses because I'm a chocoholic
Oh.
and I would eat them all. So I would
Yeah.
need something that I can't eat every day. And no, you're talking about this stress management. It's important, I think, because the world just seems to be moving faster and faster, right? And with it, I think that stress management is a bit of a challenge. So any other,
Stress message, you're
I
right.
love
This
the,
is-
yeah, I love the elastic band idea. And any other ideas on how we can manage that stress to show up a little better?
I have another visualization and then I'll answer your question. Just think of a guitar.
Yeah.
If a guitar doesn't have the keys tight enough, the music's going to drone.
Yeah.
If it has too much, it will snap the
Yeah.
string. It has to have that right amount of tension.
Yeah.
So, a tip on stress is to embrace it and chase it. Don't avoid it. A lot of people think that stress is bad for them. No, stress is really the spice of life.
Yeah.
You don't want to have unmanaged stress. Then it becomes negative because we're not in control of it. We
Yeah.
want to be stress managers instead of stress carriers.
Hmm. I like
Stress
that.
carriers usually think that they don't have the stress. And you know what? They're too busy giving it to everybody else.
Yeah.
But a stress manager knows that they have stress and is going to learn from it. Just think of any obstacle that you've had. It's made you
Yeah.
been deeper instead of weaker.
Yeah. And it
And
gives us
that,
our drive, right? When you, as you're saying that, it gives us that drive to achieve more in our life and to go outside our comfort zones and try new things and have bigger experiences. I love that.
exactly. There's a book that's excellent, a stress researcher named Kelly McGonigal at Stanford University. She wrote about the upside of stress.
Huh.
And she talked about the importance of stress is what gives us meaning
Yeah.
in our life. And so that just mindset shift will
Yeah.
make us less stressed out
Yeah.
because we're not going to say, oh no. And when I do monthly webinars for a training company, and I ask, no one actually like talks, it's like through a chat, it's not
Yeah.
a live presentation, but it's through PowerPoint. And I ask them in the chat box, what is stress? And all the answers almost always is like overwhelming, terrible, not
Yeah.
toxic, whatever.
Yeah.
And just our relationship to stress, negotiating how we deal with stress within ourselves can really take on a huge importance in our growth and our happiness.
Yeah, I love that perspective shift. And it's, and for our listeners, I hope you're getting these, sometimes these subtle perspective shifts, those mindset shifts can just profoundly change your experience of life and how you
Absolutely.
show up, right?
I have a great visualization for that if
Sure.
you want.
Yeah.
Okay. If you clasp your fingers,
Yeah.
tell me what your thumb is on top. Which,
Left thumb.
okay. And the same with me. But in a group, it's about 60, 40, 50, 50.
Okay.
Okay. So it doesn't matter if you're left or right-handed.
Yeah.
Now undo it
Yeah.
and clasp it the other way so that the other thumb is on top.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
Awkward.
So that just shows the importance of being able to change your perspective
Yeah.
and just a subtle shift that to some people it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
That's the way that's real comfortable. But even that little exercise shows that not everybody is like us. And for some of us, we need a little bit more of a shift in perspective to feel comfortable. For other people, they're comfortable right away.
Yeah. Well, and as you're speaking about that sort of comfort zone, I think, we're seeing the world in such a divided place now. And I think it's because everybody stays with their thumb clasped in that
And
one
they
way
think it's the right way, and that's the way to be.
and the only way, and everybody else is wrong. So we're seeing so much anger and, that anger can be the kiss of death in negotiations. It can damage our relationships. I know you have some strategies to help control our anger so that, we control our anger so it doesn't control us. Can you share a few of those for us?
Exactly. Well, first thing, just realize that anger is one letter short of danger.
Hmm.
And that does not mean that it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to be aggressive.
Yeah,
Aggressive is a behavior
yeah.
and anger is a feeling.
Mm,
When you're angry, you want to first make sure you're angry for good reasons and not unhealthy reasons. If you're angry at someone for being who they are and not giving you what you had hoped,
yeah,
that's different and having that will keep you in knots.
yeah,
But if you're angry because you think really that injustice has been done, then it motivates you to do something.
yeah,
So, and talking about the words, anger being one letter short of danger, if you flip-flop the word stress,
yeah.
if you read it backwards, do you know what it says? It
No.
says desserts. It shows you how sweet it is. So
Yeah,
even like our language has all this cool stuff that we don't even really think of. But a tip to manage anger is again to be in control of, is this healthy anger that's going to be productive to make me change the world to a better place? Or is it anger that I'm powerless about
yeah,
because someone has control over me and they should be a certain way?
yeah,
You want to make sure it's healthy anger.
yeah,
Anger is part of important part of life. And a
yeah,
lot of times people, particularly women, I remember having a client
yeah,
that she was saying that she was really angry. And I said, good. That's good to identify that. She says, really? You think
yeah.
okay? Like she was evaluating and grading herself. Should I really be angry? Does this be justified?
Yeah,
Yeah, anger is an emotion. It's okay. But you want to make sure you don't confuse anger and aggression.
yeah,
Because sometimes when people are angry, they talk in you statements. You don't know what you're talking
yeah,
about. What were you thinking?
yeah,
Didn't I already tell you that?
yeah,
That's a rhetorical questions. That's actually not questions, it's put downs.
yeah. Well, and these are such valuable perspective shifts, right? The fact quit seeing stress as an only a negative or anger as a negative, embrace it. And even in negotiations, I find people are always like, emotion has no place in negotiations. I'm like, we're human, embrace it. If somebody on the other party is getting very emotional and displaying it, lean into that. Oh, I seem to have really provoked a response here. Tell me what's happening for you right now,
Right.
right? It can be a beautiful way to shift the dynamic. And
Great
when we're
point.
talking about people being so attached in this, I find communication seems to be at a kind of disaster. People aren't talking to each other anymore, certainly not listening. So I know you do a lot of work in communications. I wonder if you have even just a few sort of game-changing communication skills or tips that our listeners can embrace to improve their
I
relationship.
would say the when you just asked me that question, that we need to differentiate between hearing and listening.
Yeah.
Hearing is basically the audible words. You can hear, and maybe some people hear better than others. I have problem with hearing, so maybe my hearing is not good, but I'm a good listener.
Yeah.
Listening is not so passive.
Yeah.
It is encouraging someone to speak. It's encouraging a dialogue and an exchange of information. So sometimes people think they're listening when they're just hearing.
Yeah.
And an example is when people are in an argument.
Yeah.
If someone's in an argument, they're just hearing because they're trying to prove their point. That's really the definition of an argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
And listening would be paraphrasing, empathizing. Paraphrasing would be, okay, so what I hear you saying is,
Yeah.
or empathizing sounds like that really upset you, rather than listening would be, oh, why are you so upset?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Just waiting for your turn to talk, right?
right. So I would say using I statements is really important, but also to identify really when you're aggressive or when someone's being aggressive with you and you don't even realize it because they're just telling it like it is, or they're just speaking their mind. Well, guess what? That can be very rude if
Yeah.
it's tactless
Yeah.
and it's insensitive.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's again just such an important point, right? And I've often, I advocate and I have seen in real life experience where because you're right, most, and particularly in a career as a lawyer, we don't really listen, right? We're waiting for our turn, we're waiting to make that argument. And I find one of the fastest ways to diffuse, whether you're dealing with a bully or somebody who's just incredibly argumentative, is not only to reflect back what they're saying, but make their argument even more compelling than they made it. It throws that dynamic off, right? When somebody's like
Oh,
trying to get their point, and all of a sudden you go, let me make sure I've got this right. So what you're saying is, and
I'm
then
back
you
to listening.
play it back to them in an even more powerful way than and people are like, why would you do that, Cindy? But it changes their physical posture, it changes their
Wow.
tone of voice. It can be so
Wow.
powerful.
You should
Yeah.
do seminars for lawyers on that.
Yeah. They could use it. That's
Seriously, they could use that because sometimes lawyers stereotypically can be a
yeah.
little more aggressive,
Yeah.
but I think that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And I love you made that because I think we confuse aggression and assertiveness, right? I mean, you can be assertive without being aggressive, and I'm
You're
curious,
not aggressive.
what's
You're
that?
not because when you said you can be assertive without being aggressive, that is the definition of being assertive is not aggressive.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
one is it's a you focus that the other person should be a certain way, and the other is just speaking for yourself and being respectful. Like the old 60s book, 70s book, I'm okay, you're okay.
Yes.
Assertive person would say, I'm okay, you're okay. Aggressive person would say, I'm okay, but you're not.
Yes.
And a non-assertive person would say, you're okay, but I'm not.
Yes. Yeah. I'm wondering what, because you've written so many books, what is there something that stands out for you as, one of the most surprising things that you discovered either while researching or writing one of your books?
I can't think of anything surprising because I've done it for so long now.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing surprises.
Yeah. Well, not that I haven't been surprised, but like right now, as I'm thinking about it, I can't
Yeah.
think of any surprises right now. However, what has really struck me is that self-compassion, like I said before, is the new self-esteem. And I always underestimated the importance of self-compassion and being kind to yourself. The longest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself.
Yeah.
And I am amazed at how often people undermine their relationship with themselves.
Yes.
And I think that maybe, I guess it is a surprise to me. And also, as I'm thinking about it, what has surprised me in the past is that people are afraid that they're not feeling correctly. They're
Mm,
they need validation.
yeah.
I once did a seminar because I used to do a lot of live presentations, particularly before COVID,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget when I asked people, "What makes you feel good about yourself?"
Yeah.
Because it was about, the thing was about self-esteem or whatever. And I said, write it on a card and I'm going to collect them. Do you know probably about 80% was all about external validation?
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, when my husband compliments me, when someone says at work that I do a good job, that's what makes them feel good about themselves. Well, that is kind of surprising. I was really struck by that
Yeah.
because you should be the one to validate yourself. It's great to get an applause. It's great to people say you're doing great, but that's not going to do it.
Yeah. And for listeners, I want to really allow you a second to pause and take that in. I think that is such a game changer. And and I challenge you to do the exercise that Judith just suggested. What makes you feel good about yourself? And if they're all external, maybe it's time for you to do a check-in and start coming up with a list, right?
Please say.
I love that. And it's funny you say that because when I do workshops, sometimes I'll ask and for women, and I ask them to list 25 things that they love about themselves. And
Wow.
Judith, I can't tell you how often the majority of the room are just shell shocked, sitting there, unable to come up with 25 things
Right.
how sad is that, right? So,
That's
yeah.
that's great that you do that. And when you said that, I'm thinking, oh, that's first thing is a fabulous exercise,
Thank
but it would be very hard for women
Yeah.
because women are afraid of being conceited.
Yeah.
They don't want to seem like they're too big on themselves. I actually have a coaching client now who is like so afraid of being praising herself
Yeah.
because then she thinks she's getting too big for herself. You
Yeah.
know, a lot of these messages come from way, way back.
Kindergarten.
You want to be humble. You don't want to think too much of yourself. You don't want to be a bragger.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? There's a difference between being braggy and being proud.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Now, I normally at our time, this has gone so quickly. I tell you, it's so many nuggets here. I can barely grab a hold of them all. So I normally end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts you've had in your life? And it may be what you just shared is the first surprise, but I pose it for you. And it doesn't even have to be on this topic, but just one of those aha moments that changes how you think or show up.
I think for me, the one thing of my experience as a therapist and also just life situations, I think that regret is a very strong pull to the past.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people can't forgive themselves. And I've had that also forgive themselves for not knowing then what
Mm,
they know now.
yeah.
And by self forgiveness and self compassion, and realizing, because I mean, I didn't, there's no bodies in the backyard, there's no
Yeah.
like horrible things. But, I'm thinking that was like the dumbest choice. Why did I ever do that? Why did I ever pick this? Why did I, I would over the years think and like rethink and think, I wish I didn't do that or whatever. But, negative thoughts like that are very sticky.
Yeah.
They're not like Teflon. The
Yeah.
positive thoughts are like Teflon. And so, one of the things that I think is a big challenge for a lot of people is to overcome the regrets to make you a more authentic person now and to use those lessons going forward. And forgive yourself for being foolish and not knowing then that you do now, not having the hindsight to know what is now so obvious.
That's a powerful mindset shift and it certainly resonates with me. I mean, I think before I had my epiphany and started down this path about the art of feminine negotiation and about showing up differently, my clients used to call me the Barracuda in my law practice. And I got to tell you,
Wow,
dude, there are moments, and they meant it as a compliment, right? And I'm embarrassed to say I wore it like a badge of honor. And
yours are
God,
well thought
yeah,
of.
and they're just some cringeworthy moments, right? And we don't talk enough about forgiveness. So thank you, because I think that's a beautiful message for us to end on here. And for our listeners, I really encourage you as well. Think about the things that you've been maybe carrying around, that baggage where you haven't allowed yourself for that forgiveness. And would you forgive others in that case, as Judith was saying at the beginning? I think that's beautiful. So where can people learn more about you, Judith? Where do you want us to send them?
Well, my website is Belmont Wellness, just the way it sounds. Belmont's my last name, belmontwellness.com, and also my Amazon author page.
Beautiful. Yes. And there's loads. Like I say, we got 11 books and 2 therapeutic card decks. So go be sure to check that out for our listeners.
I I
Yep.
I do on my website. I have a lot of free resources, so you
Awesome.
don't have to even buy my stuff. You can
Yeah.
go and download self-help quizzes. Like I have a forgiveness self quiz. I have a lot of worksheets and handouts that I have for my books, and I've listed some in there. So there's a wealth of stuff you can do on my website.
I love that. And for those if you're panicking because you didn't get it, we'll make sure to put that website address in our show notes. And I encourage you, take advantage when people are offering you up free resources that will help you negotiate a better life and mindset. Take advantage of those offers. And Judith, you've shared so many great nuggets here with us today. Thanks so much for joining us. Really
Well,
appreciate
thanks
it.
so much. You are a fabulous interviewer. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. It's
Fabulous.
been a great conversation. We'll have to get you back. And for our listeners, I have no doubt you got lots of value from this episode. And again, I encourage you to re-listen to it even. Maybe jot down some notes of those things that really stick for you that you want to start practicing. And for heaven's sake, share it with the people in your life that you care about as well, so they can get the benefit from this as well. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that yet. And again, before we sign off, I'd love to talk just quickly about some ways we can work together. I certainly teach from whether you're a seasoned attorney who's been around practicing practicing forever and a day or a very early stage in your career, I'd love to jump in and help find a better way to practice, right? To be more authentic, less battle worn, and ultimately be significantly more effective in the process. And I certainly would love to opportunity to either help you personally or your firm be able to thrive and stand out while still bringing a better way to practice law to your firm. If that sounds interesting, check it out at www.practicingwithpurpose.org. And that's a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle that passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.